It was one of those calm Sunday mornings that make you feel like the world finally slowed down for you. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, brushing against the steam from my coffee. I could hear the soft hum of the radio, some love song I wasn't really listening to, just background noise for another ordinary morning. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt, right before my phone started ringing on the counter. The number wasn't saved. I hesitated, wiped my hands on a towel, and answered, still half smiling. "Hello? Who's this?" The voice on the other end wasn't what I expected. It was shaky, unsure, like someone about to confess to something terrible. "Hi, is this Elena? It's Tara." I frowned, searching my memory. "Tara? I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" My tone softened out of habit, but inside, something already felt off. That name, it didn't belong anywhere in my story. Not yet, anyway. There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said it, the sentence that shattered my quiet morning. "Not exactly, but I used to date your husband. I really need to apologize to you." I froze. For a second, even the clock stopped ticking in my head. My hand tightened around the mug, and my stomach turned cold. I didn't say anything right away, just listened to the sound of her breath, the weight of her guilt, and the crack forming beneath everything I thought I knew. "Apologize? For what exactly?" I finally asked, forcing my voice to stay steady, though my heart had already started to race. On the other end, I heard her breathing quicken, the sound of someone caught between guilt and fear. "For what's been happening," she said. "I shouldn't have let it go on this long." My mind scrambled for meaning. Go on this long? What could she possibly mean? "Tara," I said slowly, "what are you talking about?" Then came a pause, the kind that hums in your ears because silence is suddenly too loud. When she finally spoke, her words barely made it through the phone. "Oh my God, he didn't tell you." Just like that, everything around me seemed to shift. The smell of coffee turned bitter, the room colder. My hand trembled as I set the cup down on the counter. Something deep in my gut told me this wasn't about the past. This was now. I wanted to believe I'd misheard her, that she was mistaken, that this was just some weird misunderstanding. But her voice, that trembling, broken tone, said otherwise. "He didn't tell me what," I whispered, but she didn't answer right away. I could almost hear her tears forming on the other end. And in that suspended moment before the truth came crashing through, one thought echoed louder than everything else. Something's terribly wrong. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. "Tara," I said carefully, "you need to explain what's going on." There was a shaky inhale, a whisper of shame before her next words. "Elena, I thought you knew. I thought he told you about us." My grip tightened around the edge of the counter. The room felt smaller, air thicker. "Us?" I repeated, each letter heavier than the last. She started to cry. I didn't know her, but her guilt filled every pause like a confession waiting to explode. When she finally managed to speak again, her voice cracked. "I used to think I was the one he was lying to," she said softly, "but now I realize I was the one helping him lie to you." My stomach twisted. The words didn't fully make sense yet, but the pain behind them did. I could feel it, like the ground shifting beneath my feet. I wanted to hang up, to walk away before she said another word, but some quiet, defiant part of me needed to know, needed to hear it all. I swallowed hard, forcing the question out. "What exactly are you apologizing for, Tara?" For a moment there was only her breath on the line, uneven, breaking. Then she whispered the words that cracked my world open. "For what's been happening. For what I should have ended." My chest tightened, the truth still just out of reach but close enough to taste. And as I stood there in my kitchen, with my coffee turning cold beside me, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear her trying to steady her breathing, but mine had already escaped me. "You called me," I finally said, my voice sharper than I intended. You said you needed to apologize. You're not hanging up until you explain. The words came out calm, almost too calm, but inside I was unraveling. My fingers were cold, gripping the counter for balance. Whatever she was about to say, I knew it was going to break something I couldn't put back together. Elena, I swear I didn't mean to ruin anything, she said, the guilt in her voice unmistakable. He told me you were separated. He said you two were done. I froze, staring at the window like I could find truth written somewhere outside. We had dinner together last night, Tara, I said. I kissed my husband goodnight. My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore, too steady for the earthquake inside me. On the other end, she began to cry. I didn't know, she whispered between sobs. He told me he loved me, that you were still living together because of money. I thought... I cut her off before she could finish. How long has this been going on? The question hung in the air, and then came her answer, barely audible, but clear enough to split me in half. Almost a year. The words echoed in my head, and suddenly the world around me felt blurry, like reality itself was rejecting what I'd just heard. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, listening to her breathe, the sound of her guilt filling the space where my trust used to live. A year. An entire year of lies hiding inside my marriage like termites in the walls. So, I said quietly, you've been seeing my husband behind my back for a year, and you thought I already knew. My words were steady, but I could feel the tremor just beneath them, waiting to escape. On the other end, Tara broke down completely. I thought he was being honest, she sobbed. I swear, Elena, I thought you were over. He told me you didn't care anymore. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting build behind my eyelids. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to wake up in a different life. Instead, I whispered the truth that suddenly felt heavier than my own body. We were never over, Tara. Not even close. The silence that followed felt like she'd finally realized the depth of what she'd done, and what he'd taken from both of us. Tears finally came, but quietly. Not the kind that release pain, the kind that seal it in. I'm so sorry, she said again, and this time I believed her. But sorry wasn't a word that could fix anything. Sorry couldn't rebuild the pieces of the woman I was before this call. I took a slow breath, the kind that tastes like resolve, and said the only thing I could manage without breaking, you will be. Then I ended the call. The sound of the click felt final, but in my chest, something dark and sharp began to stir. After the call ended, I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that no longer felt like mine. The coffee had gone cold. The radio was still playing, but the words didn't reach me. Everything felt distorted, the walls, the light, even my own reflection in the glass. I tried to breathe, but every inhale carried his name. Every exhale carried betrayal. I wasn't just hurt. I was hollowed out. I don't know how long I stood there before moving. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone again, but this time I didn't call anyone. I just stared at the screen, his name glowing on it. Ryan. The man I'd built a home with, shared dreams with, planned a future with. How many times had he lied while looking me straight in the eye? My mind replayed every casual touch, every "I love you," now poisoned by her voice. The truth had unfolded, but it hadn't finished cutting yet. And then, something inside me shifted, quiet, deliberate, powerful. The pain didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It turned into something colder. I wiped my tears, straightened my posture, and whispered to myself, no one humiliates me in my own home. My voice sounded different, calm, almost detached. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment the storm began. The hours after that call felt unreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I just watched the sunlight move across the kitchen floor until it disappeared, replaced by the soft hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts. Every part of me wanted to demand answers, but I knew better. Ryan thrived on explanations, twisting them until guilt wasn't his anymore. So I stayed silent. Let him think I was still the woman who trusted him. By the time evening came, I had rehearsed my calm 100 times. When he walked through the door, smiling like a man who still had a wife, I greeted him the same way I always did. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek. "You okay? You look tired." His voice was casual, practiced, the kind of concern that used to comfort me. "Just thinking," I replied, forcing a faint smile. "You know me. Can't turn my brain off." He laughed, completely unaware that I was studying every movement, every lie behind his eyes. He poured himself a glass of wine, loosened his tie, and started talking about work problems, his favorite excuse for late nights. I nodded in all the right places, even smiled once or twice. But inside, something cold and sharp had settled in. He was sitting there, breathing, joking, pretending, while I already knew everything. It was surreal, almost cinematic, watching a man perform for a stage he didn't realize had changed its audience. Later that night, while he showered, I sat on the edge of our bed and stared at his phone resting on the nightstand. For years, I'd promised myself I would never be that woman, the one who checked her husband's messages. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone who needed the truth, not the version he'd fed me. My fingers shook as I unlocked it, my chest tightening like my body already knew what I'd find. There it was. Her name. Tara. Dozens of messages, tiny daggers hidden in plain sight. "I can't believe you're still sleeping next to her. You said it'd be over soon." Each one a confession, time-stamped and undeniable. I felt my throat close, but I didn't cry this time. Instead, I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. Evidence. Proof. The air felt heavy, thick with deceit, but there was a strange calm in having the truth finally laid bare. When I put the phone back, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Same face, same woman, just rewritten. The ache was still there, but it had direction now. "You'll never see it coming, Ryan," I whispered to myself, my voice barely a breath. "You'll think you've won, until the end." I turned off the light, lay beside him when he came to bed, and smiled when he kissed my shoulder goodnight. He thought he was sleeping next to his wife. He had no idea he was lying beside his reckoning. I barely slept that night. Every sound, the rustle of sheets, his breathing, the faint hum of the street outside, kept looping through my head like a cruel reminder. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how many nights he had come home from her arms to lie next to me. The thought made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay still. Rage was easy, control was harder, and control was exactly what I needed. In the morning, I made him breakfast like always. He smiled, kissed my forehead, thanked me. His same old routine, the same words, the same tone. But something about watching him now was almost fascinating. How effortlessly he played the part. How completely he believed I was still his audience. I realized that morning that he wasn't just unfaithful. He was arrogant. And arrogance, I thought, was the easiest weakness to exploit. As soon as the door closed behind him, I let the silence swallow the house. The air still smelled like his cologne, sharp and familiar, but tainted now. I sat at the table, the untouched toast growing cold in front of me, and started to plan. Not out of anger, but precision. I didn't want to destroy him in a burst of fury. I wanted him to crumble slowly under the weight of his own lies. By the time I finished my coffee, I already knew where to start. The next week, I became the woman he thought he'd broken. Soft, affectionate, predictable. I made his favorite dinners, laughed at his stories, even sent him little messages during the day. Every word was part of the act, and the more I played the part, the more convinced he became that he'd gotten away with it. He didn't notice how closely I watched him, or how I took mental notes of everything he said. To him, I was forgiving. To me, I was rehearsing. One night, I suggested something I hadn't in months, a dinner, just the two of us. "You're full of surprises lately," he said, grinning as if he'd won me back. "What's the occasion?" I smiled and touched his arm lightly. "You'll see," I told him. I just think it's time we celebrate honesty and trust. He laughed, completely missing the weight of those words. Inside, I felt the first spark of satisfaction I'd had in days. He had no idea that the night he thought was about romance would be the beginning of his unmasking. But I wasn't done yet. I still had one more piece to move into place. That night, after he fell asleep, I scrolled through my contacts until I found her number. Tara. My hand hovered over the call button for a moment before I pressed it. When she answered, her voice was tired, small. Elena? She said, surprised. I took a breath, steady and measured. Yes, I think we need to talk. There was a long pause before she spoke again. Elena, I don't know what to say, she whispered. I could hear the guilt pressing against every syllable. You don't have to say much, I replied gently. I just think we should clear the air. He fooled both of us, didn't he? My tone was calm, almost compassionate, the kind of voice that makes people lower their guard. I'm not calling to fight, Tara. I'm calling because I think it's time we stop letting him control the story. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, through a shaky breath, she said, You're right. He lied to both of us. Maybe talking would help. Good, I said softly. Then let's meet. Somewhere neutral, maybe dinner. I'll handle the details. She hesitated again, but finally agreed. When I hung up, my hands were steady for the first time in days. I'd played my part perfectly, the forgiving wife, the woman ready to make peace. She would come, and so would he. Neither of them knowing I was leading them to the same place. The next morning, I set it all in motion. I made reservations at his favorite restaurant, the one where he always bragged about knowing the chef. I told him it was a surprise date, something to rekindle the spark. And later that afternoon, I texted her the same location, same time. Let's talk face to face, I wrote. It's time we both stop pretending. I could almost taste the irony, the dinner of honesty and trust that would expose everything he'd tried to hide. The day of the dinner arrived, and I moved through it like a woman in two worlds, the calm wife on the surface, the strategist underneath. Ryan left for work without a clue, kissing my cheek like always. I watched him go with a faint smile, knowing it would be the last time he left this house believing everything was fine. I spent the afternoon preparing, not my makeup or my hair, but my composure. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about rage. It was about timing. By evening, I slipped into the kind of dress he loved, not for him, but for the performance. I wanted him relaxed, confident, completely blind to what was coming. I arrived early, spoke to the host quietly, made sure the table was set exactly the way he liked it. 2 candles, 1 bottle of wine, and 3 seats. Every detail mattered. I wanted everything to look perfect, because perfection would make the betrayal sting deeper when the illusion shattered. As I sat there waiting, I could feel my heartbeat settle into something steady, almost cold. This wasn't a crime of passion anymore. It was justice wrapped in elegance. When Ryan texted, "On my way, love," I smiled. And when I saw Tara's name pop up seconds later, "I'm nervous, but I'm coming," I smiled again. They were both walking straight into the truth, and I would be there to greet them with a toast to honesty. The restaurant was softly lit, filled with the low murmur of clinking glasses and quiet laughter. It was the kind of place where secrets like to hide in plain sight. I arrived first, of course. I wanted to feel the air, the rhythm of the room before the storm began. The waiter greeted me by name, Ryan's name, and led me to our table. I smiled as I sat down, knowing he'd bragged enough about us being regulars. That familiarity would make this even sweeter. A few minutes later, I saw him walk in. Confident, charming, that easy smile that once made me melt. He spotted me and waved, completely oblivious to the trap he was walking into. "You look beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss me. I smiled back, steady and serene. "I wanted tonight to be special," I told him. He chuckled, pulling out his chair, clearly expecting candlelight forgiveness. If only he knew how temporary his comfort was. He started talking right away. Stories from work, a new client, something about a promotion. I nodded, pretending to listen, my eyes flicking toward the entrance every few seconds. And then, there she was. Tara. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on us, and her whole body froze. Ryan noticed her too. The color drained from his face instantly. I leaned back, folded my napkin over my lap, and smiled. "Oh," I said softly. "Perfect timing. You both made it." Ryan blinked, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for a script that no longer existed. "Tara, what are you—" he began, but his voice cracked halfway through. Tara stood frozen near the table, her eyes darting between us, realization washing over her in waves. "Elena," she whispered, "you didn't say he'd be here." I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "Oh, didn't I? Must have slipped my mind. I just thought a dinner about honesty should include everyone who's been living in the same lie." The silence around us was electric. Even the waiter paused mid-step, sensing the tension. Ryan's voice dropped, shaky and defensive. "What is this?" he asked, trying to sound calm. "A dinner," I said smoothly, "to celebrate honesty and trust. Remember?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the neatly folded stack of printed text messages. "I thought it'd be nice to keep all your lies in one place." I laid them in the center of the table, between the wine glasses. The sight of his own words staring back at him was almost beautiful. He tried to speak again, but Tara interrupted, her voice trembling. "You told me she knew, Ryan. You said she didn't care." He turned to her, panic bleeding through his charm. "Tara, please, I raised a hand, silencing him. "You already explained everything," I said quietly. "Every night, to her." His jaw tightened, his eyes begging for mercy he hadn't earned. I took a slow sip of wine and watched the man who thought he'd mastered deceit finally drown in his own reflection. The whole room seemed to fade into silence, like even the air knew better than to interrupt. Ryan's face had drained of color, his confidence replaced by the raw look of a man cornered. Tara's tears began to fall, one by one, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. I sat there perfectly still, my heart steady. For months, I'd been the one living in confusion. Now it was their turn to sit in it. "You both said you wanted closure," I finally said, my voice soft but razor sharp. "Consider this it." Ryan stood, reaching for my arm. "Elena, please, I can explain." I pulled back gently, my calm cutting deeper than any scream could. "No," I said. "You've done enough explaining. To both of us." I gathered my purse, leaving the stack of messages where they lay like evidence in a courtroom. Tara couldn't look at me. Ryan couldn't look at either of us. The only sound was the slow pour of the wine bottle as it tipped, spilling red across the white tablecloth. Fitting, I thought, for the ending of his little performance. As I walked out, I didn't rush. Every step felt deliberate, freeing. Behind me, I could hear the muffled chaos of excuses and tears, but none of it belonged to me anymore. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I preferred the kind that lingered. The kind that made them replay this moment every time they looked at each other. By the time I reached the door, I smiled to myself. Because sometimes, the most elegant justice is simply walking away while they're still burning. Months later, I found myself in a small cafe downtown, one I'd never been to before. It smelled like roasted beans and freedom. The kind of place where no one knew my story, where my name was just another on a coffee cup. I sat by the window watching people pass by, sunlight glinting off my ringless hand as I stirred my drink. It was strange how normal peace could feel after so much chaos. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for a phone call, an apology, or a lie. The barista smiled as she refilled my cup, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in the glass. Softer, lighter, a woman I barely recognized but liked instantly. I'd learned that healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, in small moments like these, when you realize you're no longer rehearsing pain. My phone buzzed on the table, and when I turned it over, the screen showed an unfamiliar number. I didn't expect the voice that came through. "Elena," the message read. You were right. He tried to come back to me. I told him to go to hell. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry again. Tara. Her words hung there for a second, weightless now. I smiled faintly, typing my reply. Apology accepted. He's your problem now, or at least he was. I hit send, blocked the number, and set the phone face down. Some apologies don't need a conversation, they just need closure. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the sun warm my face through the window. There was something poetic about that. Light touching me again, after so many months of shadows. For so long I had lived inside his lies, shaping myself around his moods, waiting for honesty that never came. But now, my life felt uncluttered. No more waiting, no more pretending. Just air, space, and a stillness that didn't hurt. It was freedom, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Outside, a couple laughed as they crossed the street, their hands brushing together, full of that naive trust I once had. And yet, instead of bitterness, I felt something closer to gratitude. That pain, his betrayal, had stripped me down to my core, but it also rebuilt me. It taught me that sometimes the end of what you thought you wanted is the beginning of what you actually need. I no longer wanted revenge. I wanted peace, and I had finally claimed it. I took one last sip of my coffee, savoring the taste like it was proof that life could still be sweet. I thought about everything I'd lost and realized how much more I'd gained: clarity, dignity, and the quiet power of walking away without looking back. My story didn't end with heartbreak or fury. It ended with me, whole, steady, and untouched by the chaos I left behind. As I sat there, the world outside kept moving, cars passing, conversations rising and fading, and I realized how small that chapter of my life had become. Once, it had consumed me. Now, it was just a story I used to live in, one I no longer had to tell. I smiled to myself, not out of triumph, but understanding. Some endings don't roar, they exhale. That was my freedom. The silence after the storm, the calm after the truth finally burned itself out. I gathered my things, dropped a few bills on the table, and stood up. My chair scraped softly against the floor, a small final sound that somehow felt like closure. When I walked out, the sunlight hit me full in the face, warm and unapologetic. I didn't look back at the cafe. There was nothing left behind that belonged to me. Every step forward felt lighter, as if the ground itself was welcoming the woman I had become. And as I crossed the street, a quiet thought rose in my chest, the same one that would linger long after the credits of my story rolled. She called to apologize for what I didn't know, but in the end, I was the one who walked away without regrets.